Mike hadn't planned on finding anything unusual that evening. The old phone, dusty and forgotten at the back of a drawer, had been there for years. Its cracked screen and faintly flickering display made it feel like a relic from a life he barely remembered. He had meant only to clear out some clutter before the weekend. But curiosity led him to press the power button. The screen blinked reluctantly to life, showing only a few old apps, most of them useless or outdated. But one icon stood out, or rather, the lack of one. There was a single app, nameless, its icon a pale, shifting gray that seemed to breathe ever so slightly. He hesitated, thumb hovering over it. Something about it felt wrong. Yet the faint thrill of discovery nudged him forward. When he tapped it, the screen flickered again, and a video began to play. It was a short clip of a street corner in his city, mundane at first glance. A man tripped over a curb, a coffee cup flying from his hand. Mike frowned. He didn't recognize the man, but the camera angle, the clarity of the moment, felt eerily intimate. Shaking his head, he whispered to himself, "Must be some weird demo or old footage." Yet when he checked the news later that evening, the same scene had made headlines. A man tripped at that very corner, spilling coffee on himself and causing a minor traffic jam. Mike's stomach twisted. The odds of finding an exact video of a real-life moment, down to the smallest detail, were astronomical. He spent the next hour nervously scrolling through the app. Every video seemed random, showing snippets of mundane life. Street vendors, parked cars, people walking dogs. Yet every clip, no matter how trivial, matched reality when he checked. A bus arriving exactly on time. A dog barking at the same mailbox he had passed that morning. His heart began to race. A creeping sense of unease settled in. This wasn't just a strange app. It was something else. Something sentient, maybe, or impossibly precise. He tried deleting a video, tapping furiously at the screen, but it reappeared moments later, as if mocking him. Mike felt a cold sweat forming along the back of his neck. The apartment was silent except for the occasional hum of the fridge. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and the city lights outside flickered like weak fireflies against the night sky. He wanted to leave the phone alone, to push it into the drawer and pretend it didn't exist. But the pull of curiosity was too strong. He tapped another clip. This one showed his own street. A figure walked down the sidewalk, a stranger perhaps, but the movement, the gait, the jacket, all strangely familiar. Mike's pulse quickened. He knew the corner where the figure would turn. And then, exactly as the video had predicted, the stranger stepped into view in real life, walking precisely as shown. Mike stumbled back from the couch, nearly dropping the phone. His mind raced, a mix of disbelief and panic. Could this thing predict the future? Or was it recording somehow, invisibly following him? A knock at the door made him jump, heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, he saw no one. The empty hallway, dimly lit by the flickering bulb above, felt suddenly oppressive. The shadows seemed longer than they should have been, reaching out with invisible fingers. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a sophisticated AI app, a hidden project, a glitch in reality that only he had stumbled upon. Rationality seemed thin, like fragile glass ready to shatter. His chest tightened with each passing second. The air in the room felt heavy, almost viscous, as if the atmosphere itself had changed. Mike's thoughts spiraled. If this app could predict mundane events, what else could it predict? Accidents? Crimes? Deaths? The more he imagined, the colder he felt. He turned the phone over in his hands, staring at it like it was a living thing, waiting, watching, judging. Night deepened around him. The city outside became a blur of lights and distant sirens, but inside the apartment, time seemed to slow. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the app, from the images that seemed to pulse with life. Each clip whispered of inevitability, as if the world beyond the screen was already written, and the app merely let him peek at the lines of the story. By the time the clock struck midnight, Mike was trembling. His hands shook as he set the phone down on the table, yet he couldn't leave it. The nameless app sat there, innocuous and menacing, its gray icon breathing softly, rhythmically, as if alive. For the first time in years, Mike felt truly afraid. Not of a person, not of the dark, but of something he couldn't understand, couldn't predict, couldn't fight. And as he lay awake that night, the shadows of his apartment stretching long and strange across the walls, he realized that curiosity had a price he was only beginning to glimpse. By morning, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The app was not just a curiosity, it was something else, something powerful, something that had already chosen him. The morning light did little to chase away the unease clinging to Mike. The apartment felt different, somehow smaller, heavier, as if the shadows of the night had left residue in the corners. The nameless app sat on the old phone, innocuous and silent. Yet he couldn't resist opening it again. Curiosity burned hotter than fear. He tapped the screen, and a new video played. This one was of his friend, Laura, walking into the local cafe. Mike frowned. The video captured every movement with eerie precision, the exact way she lifted her bag, the tilt of her head as she ordered coffee, even the expression of mild frustration at a slow barista. He shook his head. "This can't be real," he muttered, but a sliver of dread tickled the back of his neck. Against his better judgment, Mike decided to experiment. He shared the video with Laura over a text, jokingly warning her that future tech is watching you. She laughed, assuming it was some viral prank. Mike laughed too, though the sound caught in his throat, hollow and uncertain. The following afternoon, news alerts buzzed on his phone. A minor incident at the cafe, a spill, a brief scuffle over a dropped wallet. Laura had been there, just as the video had shown. Mike's stomach turned. It wasn't just a coincidence. The app wasn't guessing. It was foretelling. A chill settled over him. Every glance at the screen made him shiver. More videos appeared, clips of strangers, passing cars, quiet streets, and every single one matched real-world events with disquieting accuracy. He tried to look away, to close the app, but an inexplicable pull kept him coming back. He wanted to understand it, to control it, yet each tap felt like a small surrender. Mike began to notice changes in himself. Sleep came harder, And when it did, his dreams were restless, filled with half-formed images from the app. Shadows seemed sharper, sounds louder, and the faintest creaks of his apartment echoed like warnings. He imagined eyes watching him, not just through the videos, but from somewhere beyond, somewhere impossible to see. By midweek, his experiments grew bolder. He tried to predict small, harmless events. Which bus would arrive first? Who would win a casual bet at work? Each prediction succeeded. Each success strengthened the sense of unnatural power and the creeping terror beneath it. The app was no longer just a curiosity. It was a tool of fate. And fate, as Mike was beginning to realize, was merciless. One night, alone in the apartment, Mike's anxiety reached a peak. He tapped a video at random. It showed a man crossing a dimly lit street. The man stumbled, and the footage froze for a moment on his face, shocked, terrified, familiar. Mike blinked. He knew that face. It was his neighbor, the man who always walked his dog late at night. The app didn't just show him. It felt like it was daring him to intervene. Heart-hammering, Mike raced downstairs. But when he arrived at the street, nothing had happened yet. The man was safe, unaware, just walking his dog as usual. A strange mixture of relief and horror swept through Mike. He realized the videos weren't memories, they were warnings. And the act of seeing them made him complicit in what might come next. Days blurred together. Mike stopped leaving his apartment except for essentials. And even then, he checked the app first, as if the small screen contained the only truth in the world. He began to feel the eyes behind the videos, unblinking, cold, patient. Sometimes he thought he saw the figures in the clips reflected in his window at night, or in the glass of the refrigerator door, though it was impossible. Logic was useless against the creeping certainty that the app was alive. Then came the first real mistake. Mike, desperate to prove the app's predictions were harmless, sent a video of a minor car accident to a friend jokingly. Hours later, the accident happened. His friend wasn't hurt, but the news story was chillingly precise. The crash occurred exactly as shown in the clip. Mike's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He felt a weight pressing against his chest, cold and relentless. He couldn't shake the feeling that every choice, every tap, was pulling him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. Fear began to consume him. He stopped talking to people, stopped trusting his own instincts. The app dictated his thoughts, his actions, his very perception of reality. Shadows lengthened across the walls, corners darkened unnaturally, and sounds, the faint creaks of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant roar of traffic, took on sinister tones. He imagined whispers coming from the phone, low murmurs of inevitability. By the end of the week, Mike had grown pale, haunted, almost unrecognizable. Sleep was a memory, replaced by nights spent watching videos, verifying them, panicking at coincidences that were no longer coincidences. He began to see patterns in the randomness, an underlying design he could not comprehend. And beneath it all, a terrifying certainty. The app was not merely showing the future. It was guiding it, shaping it, and he was trapped inside its vision. Late one night, the phone lit up with a new video. This time, it was him, sitting in his apartment, scrolling through the very app that had ensnared him. The camera angle was exact. Every detail of his posture, the cluttered desk, the faint glow of the city outside. Mike's breath caught in his throat. The app wasn't just predicting events now. It was watching him, documenting him, preparing him for something he could not yet understand. And in that moment, the full horror of curiosity struck him. This was no longer a game. The app wasn't a tool, a prank, or a glitch. It was a predator, patient and relentless. And Mike had let it right into his life, into his mind, and inevitably, into his future. Mike barely slept that night. The apartment felt alive with whispers that didn't exist, with shadows stretching in impossible ways along the walls. Every glance at the phone made him flinch. The app, nameless and silent, pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing, waiting. He could no longer tell whether it was curiosity or fear that made him open it again. Perhaps it was both. The video that appeared was different this time. He stared at the screen and froze. It was him. Exactly as he sat on his couch, the same tense posture, the same pale, haunted expression. Mike's stomach knotted, a cold fear spreading through him. He hadn't noticed the recording device, the camera angle, the way the light caught on his sweat-soaked forehead. But the app had seen him, had recorded him, and now it displayed him with an unsettling intimacy. For hours, he scrolled through the app, desperate to understand. Every video now seemed to converge, pointing toward him, toward his life. Small accidents, minor injuries, obvious coincidences. They were warnings, but of what? The thought that it might be predicting his own death clawed at his mind. He tried to rationalize it, but reason was a fragile thing, shattered under the weight of impossible certainty. The next day, Mike began noticing changes around him that were subtle yet unmistakable. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, reflected across the wall in the dim morning light. A figure glimpsed at the corner of his vision, disappearing when he turned. Footsteps behind him in the empty hallway, or perhaps in his own apartment. Too faint to confirm, but impossible to ignore. Every creak, every sigh of the building became a signal. The world had grown sinister, charged with the promise of violence, of inevitability. Mike tried to delete the app. Tap after tap, hold and press, force close, even a full reset of the phone, but it returned. On the same phone, on a replacement device, even when he tried to throw the original away, it reappeared, waiting. He realized then that the app was not bound to technology. It was something else, something patient, something that followed him, invisible, omnipresent. His isolation grew. He stopped answering calls. Friends' messages went unread, emails ignored. He could barely leave his apartment without consulting the app first, to check if the streets, the intersections, the city itself were safe. Or rather, to see how the app would show them. Every prediction, every clip, filled him with dread. Each one was a small reminder that he was being watched, documented, guided. Then the video appeared, the one that made him nearly collapse. It showed the door to his apartment swinging open on its own, a shadow moving past it. And then the couch, empty, except for him, frozen in fear. The timestamp flickered. Tomorrow night. At this exact hour. Mike's hands shook as he dropped the phone onto the couch. He couldn't tell if it was real, if the app was predicting or dictating. Every logical thought fled. He realized with a shivering clarity that he had no control over what would happen, and any attempt to intervene might only hasten the outcome. The sense of inevitability was suffocating. Sleep became impossible. He sat in the dim light of his apartment, eyes locked on the blank walls, listening for sounds that might not exist. Shadows danced along the edges of his vision, mocking, teasing, and the quiet hum of the city outside sounded like a chant of warning. Every glance at the phone felt like staring into a mirror that reflected not just his image, but his fate. Mike began to see himself everywhere. In passing strangers, in the shapes of trees swaying in the wind, in the way a delivery person moved down the hallway. Everything seemed to echo the videos. Everything seemed to signal the same terrible truth. He could not escape what was coming. The app was not just watching. It was preparing him, guiding him, and the end it promised felt unavoidable. Days stretched into nights without distinction. He tried to leave the apartment for food, for water, for sanity, but the app's videos tracked him in real time. Minor mishaps, small warnings, each one unnervingly accurate. A car braking abruptly, a dog barking, a fire alarm ringing unexpectedly. Every prediction came true. Every corner of his world had become a reflection of the app's silent power. By the time the sun set on the third day, Mike was exhausted, hollowed out by fear. The shadows in his apartment seemed to thicken, pressing against the walls, creeping toward him. He realized that the app wasn't simply predicting events. It was orchestrating them. He was no longer the observer. He was part of the script, trapped in a narrative written by something beyond comprehension. The final video that night was clear, intimate, and horrifying. It showed him asleep, his body tense, eyes darting under closed lids. And then the frame shifted, showing the room around him, empty and silent, the shadows stretching toward the bed like fingers. A timestamp blinked. Exactly 12 hours from now. Mike's pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the inevitability pressing down on him, a weight heavier than steel. For the first time, he cried. Not in relief, not in frustration, but in absolute terror. He realized the truth. The app wasn't just a window. It was a predator, and he was already its prey. As the night deepened, the city outside became distant, irrelevant. The apartment shrank around him, corners bending in unnatural ways. Every sound, every flicker of light, every creak and whisper seemed magnified. A symphony of dread. Mike understood, with a shuddering finality, that he could not run, could not hide, could not escape. The app had chosen him, and whatever it intended would come to pass. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the phone and the pulsing gray icon, it waited. Patient, silent, inevitable. Mike didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the apartment seemed amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sirens, even the faint groan of the building settling. His hands shook as he gripped the phone, the app open to the same ominous screen that had haunted him for days. The countdown ticked relentlessly. 12 hours until the predicted moment. He paced the apartment, trying to formulate a plan. Logic offered nothing. Every option seemed doomed before he even considered it. The app's videos had always been accurate, frighteningly, impossibly so. He had tried to ignore them, resist them, even delete the app. But it had returned each time. Whatever force this was, it was patient, intelligent, and unrelenting. Desperation clawed at him. He considered calling the police, friends, anyone. But fear rooted him to the apartment. The videos had already shown him the futility of outside intervention. Every prediction came true, every minor misstep magnified into consequence. And now, the ultimate prediction loomed over him, like a shadow too heavy to bear. The first signs came in subtle ways. Lights flickered unpredictably, casting the apartment in stark, shifting patterns. Shadows moved where no object could create them. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting imperceptibly, pressing in on him. A whisper, soft, almost imagined, brushed against the back of his neck. He spun, but the room remained empty. He tried to distract himself. Television, music, cleaning, pacing. But nothing broke the oppressive tension. Each glance at the phone brought new horror. Videos of himself, more detailed, more invasive. His every twitch, every flinch, every fearful glance was documented, analyzed, presented as evidence of inevitability. He was no longer an observer. He was part of the app's cruel design. By morning, Mike was exhausted, skin pale, eyes rimmed with red. The countdown had dwindled to mere hours. He realized he had one choice: confrontation. If the app intended to dictate his fate, he would fight. He didn't know how, but he would not go quietly. He began preparations. He cleared his apartment of anything that could be used against him or for him. He blocked doors with furniture, covered mirrors, unplugged electronics. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated to counteract whatever unseen force was orchestrating his doom. Yet even as he worked, the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, as if mocking him. Time warped. The sun rose and fell, indifferent, while the app's countdown marched on. Mike's sense of reality frayed. He could no longer tell whether the sounds were real or hallucinated, whether the shadows were tangible or imagined. Even the light felt malevolent, slipping through curtains with a sharpness that made his skin crawl. Then, the first undeniable event occurred. A loud crash from the street below, the sound of metal hitting concrete. Mike froze, staring at the video on his phone. It matched exactly. A car collision. Vehicles mangled in precise detail, debris scattered. His heart raced, terror now fully uncontained. The app had predicted this, and now it was happening. The boundary between prediction and reality had collapsed. Panic gripped him. He wanted to leave, to flee the apartment, but instinct screamed that every choice, every movement, was foreseen. The app had guided him here, and any attempt at escape might accelerate the outcome. He realized that struggle was not optional. It was required, even if the fight seemed hopeless. Hours passed. Each movement of Mike's own body felt observed, orchestrated. He checked the phone constantly, each video more intrusive, more precise. Footsteps in his hallway? Video showed him checking the door before he even heard them. Objects moving. Video anticipated his reactions. He was trapped inside a cycle he could not break. The final hour arrived. Mike felt his pulse in his throat, the pounding of his heart in his temples. Shadows stretched impossibly across the walls, the apartment transformed into an alien landscape. He could hear the faint hum of the phone, a presence almost sentient, almost breathing. It was not just a countdown. It was an invitation, a warning, a declaration. He sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at the video that showed him in real time, trembling, desperate, surrounded by shadows that were already there. If not physically, then in some other dimension he could not perceive. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. Every instinct screamed to hide, to flee, to erase the app. But he knew it was too late. The struggle was no longer with the app, but with the inevitability it represented. Mike's mind raced. Memories of earlier warnings, minor accidents, the precise recordings of friends and neighbors, all came together in a horrifying mosaic. The app had shaped his life subtly, nudged him toward this moment, conditioned him. And now, the final act was imminent. As the countdown hit 0, Mike felt a cold presence envelop him. Shadows solidified into forms, impossible, indistinct, yet undeniably there. The apartment seemed to tilt, the walls breathing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He could hear whispers, now clear, forming words he did not want to hear. It was always you. And then, a flash of realization. The app had not just predicted death. It had cultivated fear, dependency, obsession. Every choice, every glance, every tap had drawn him closer to the point of no return. The struggle was not against the app, but against the compulsion it had implanted within him. Mike's hands shook violently as he threw the phone to the floor, smashing the screen. Silence followed. For a fleeting moment, he felt the oppressive weight lift. Shadows receded. The apartment seemed normal. The city indifferent. Relief flickered. But it was deceptive. A final video appeared, playing on the broken shards of the phone's screen. Him, sitting in his apartment, staring at the camera, eyes wide with terror, the shadows already creeping back. The struggle had only just begun. Mike's apartment was silent now, but it was a fragile silence, one that pressed down on him like a living weight. The shards of his phone lay scattered across the floor, black glass reflecting the dim light. He thought, foolishly, desperately, that breaking the device might sever the connection, might end the torment. But deep down, he knew it was not about the phone. The shadows had returned. At first, they were subtle, curling along the corners, elongating unnaturally. Then they moved with purpose, gathering, converging toward him. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of something metallic and sharp. Every instinct in Mike screamed that this was the moment he had been preparing for. The confrontation he could not avoid. He stood, trembling, heart hammering. The app, or whatever force it represented, had shaped him into this moment. Every fear, every obsession, every sleepless hour had led him here. There was no escape. The shadows solidified, forms bending and twisting impossibly, neither fully human nor fully object, but undeniably alive. They whispered, a chorus of voices overlapping, promising, warning, condemning. Mike realized that the fight was not physical. He could not strike, could not run, could not hide. The struggle had been within him, inside his mind, and now it manifested around him. Every flicker of light, every distortion of space, every whisper of sound was the culmination of days of anticipation. The app's cruel orchestration of fear. He tried to reason with it, to appeal to logic. "I'm done," he whispered. "I'm done following your rules. I'm done letting you control me." His words seemed absurd against the weight of inevitability pressing in. The shadows paused, almost as if considering, their forms quivering in a sick imitation of thought. Then the room shifted. The walls bent, the ceiling lowered, and the floor seemed to ripple beneath his feet. The shadows surged, enveloping him, and for a moment, Mike felt a strange calm. It was as if the entity was testing him, probing the boundaries of his courage and desperation. He held his ground, gripping the shards of the phone like a talisman against the impossible. A voice spoke, clear, singular, and cold. "Fear brought you here. Fear sustains you. Release it, and you release yourself." Mike hesitated, terror and defiance warring inside him. Every instinct screamed to flee, to submit, to give in. But a flicker of clarity struck him. The app had thrived on his obsession, on the way he had let it dominate his perception. Maybe, just maybe, the only way to fight was to refuse the narrative entirely. He dropped the shards. The sound of glass hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. He closed his eyes, drawing in a shuddering breath, and let the fear wash over him without resistance. He stopped moving, stopped reacting, stopped anticipating. He was present, here and now, separate from the videos, the shadows, the countdown. The shadows hesitated. The whispers faltered. The air shifted lighter, less oppressive. Mike opened his eyes slowly, expecting horror, expecting pain. But the forms were less distinct now, fading, dissolving into the corners. The apartment seemed normal again, mundane and indifferent. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself relief. But then the phone lit up on its own, screen glowing despite being broken, displaying a single video. It was him. Older, wearier, sitting in the same apartment, staring at the camera, eyes wide with the same terror. The caption scrolled slowly. "It never ends." Mike staggered back. The realization hit him like ice water. The app, the entity, the shadows, they had not been destroyed. They had been endured. His fear no longer controlled him, but they still existed. Patient, waiting, inevitable. The struggle might have paused, but it was not over. He sank onto the couch, exhaustion and relief tangled with terror. The apartment was quiet again. For now, the shadows reduced to faint traces along the corners. The city outside continued indifferent, alive, oblivious. Mike felt the weight of survival pressing down. Not just the physical survival, but the survival of his mind, his will, his identity. Time passed in a distorted way. Days, perhaps weeks, blurred together. Mike left the apartment, walked outside, interacted with the world, but always with a shadow at the edge of his perception. A pulse of unease that reminded him of the entity lurking behind the digital veil. He was free, but only partially. The app had lost its grip, but the knowledge of its power lingered, a permanent scar on his consciousness. Sometimes, at night, the faint glow of a phone in a dark room catches his eye. Sometimes, a shadow flickers in a corner, too precise to be accidental. And sometimes, just sometimes, he feels it. Watching, waiting, patient. Not malicious yet, not immediate. but always inevitable. Mike has survived, yes, but he has learned that survival is not the end. It is a beginning, a fragile, uncertain beginning, shadowed by the knowledge that some things, some entities, cannot be fully defeated. They can only be endured. And in the silence, in the dark, he whispers to himself, I am ready. I will endure.